Hello, and thank you for joining Direct Marketing News for today's webcast, 3 Ways to Fix Your Review and Approval Process, brought to you by Proof HQ, a Workfront company. I'm Elise Dupre, Associate Editor of Direct Marketing News, and I'll be your moderator today. The creative content review and approval process is a vital step in getting marketing campaigns out the door. But when was the last time you looked into how to improve this process? Or for that matter, do you even have a review process in place? Many marketing project managers continue to use outdated and time-consuming techniques, impeding their team's creativity and productivity. In this webcast, we'll discuss how to deliver projects faster, how to reduce revisions, and how to cut proof management efforts. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have Kelsey Ebelhair and Michael Cunningham. Kelsey is the Solutions Marketing Manager for Proof HQ, and Michael is the company's Content Marketing Manager. But before I turn it over to Kelsey and Michael, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you're on Twitter and would like to comment, please use the hashtag DMN or hashtag FixProcess. Also, there will be a Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions. And the presentation will be made available. So with that, Michael, I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you so very much. And we are honored and grateful that you guys have decided to join us today. Welcome to our webinar. Again, my name is Michael Cunningham. As we all know, being in the world of marketing, that a main component of effective marketing project management is the creative review and approval process. And without a proper process, a project can bounce ineffectively from version to version, lose focus, and flounder with little progress. Companies must manage content in a collaborative manner to create powerful marketing campaigns that reach and exceed objectives. So let me show you what I mean by that. So in this illustration, I'm showing you what might be a typical review and approval process. And for the most part, they're very manual, they're resource heavy, and oftentimes, actually more than likely, inefficient. Most companies still manage review and approval by emailing large PDF attachments back and forth, using FTP to send artwork, manually walking proofs from reviewer to reviewer, and even sending fax copies of designs for feedback. I mean, who still does that? But so the stakeholders generally collaborate via email, right? And layered on top of all of this are dozens of additional tasks required to get the project done. And at the center of this maelstrom of manual activity typically sits a marketing project manager or a traffic manager who is acting like a traffic cop, trying to keep the process moving and the project on schedule. Now, for many of us, this is a fine workflow. It's what we've been doing all along, but the risks associated with it are conflicting comments and conflicting decisions, file size limits when you're emailing something that's too big, perhaps, and then you get some service stability if the files get too big, and you're trying to keep track of the right versions and spending additional time and effort with other teams outside of the review team. It can be all a bit chaotic. So I've got some bad news and some good news regarding your creative review and approval process. Now, the bad news is your current process is probably broken. Even the one that I showed you in the illustration, that really is a broken process. It could be made better. Or worse, you don't even have a process that you are aware of. But the good news is, with a small amount of strategic planning and an investment in time, and that time investment is taking place here on this webinar, your review and approval process will be powerful and productive. Now, the creative review and approval process, like I said, must be optimized and managed to increase efficiency and decrease time to completion and cost. And this process should be regarded as a business critical process and must be optimized to bring the highest level of value for you, your team, your client, and even your organization. It is part of the project management process that requires more strategic follow-through than simply checking off a box on the project timeline. In short, this is more than just the creative team that gets involved with the review and approval process. So what I'm going to do is invite Kelsey to walk you through the various marketing departments or creative agencies that are affected by the review and approval process. Take it away, Kelsey.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so this is Kelsey Ebelhair from the Proof HQ team, and again, thank you all for joining us. So let's kind of go into some of those departments. So the first one we're going to talk about is brand management. Really, brand management encompasses more functions than just marketing. It includes more than that, right? Marketing research, communications, your PR team, your design team. The brand management organization, it really develops an accountability structure for different stakeholders during that entire content creation process and on through your marketing campaign execution, right? So they also consist in this development and refinement of graphic and digital compliance standards. So brand control and accountability are truly important within brand management. Really, with those varying level of edicts, audit trails are essential for providing that transparency into all of the account activity that happens while a creative asset is being made, and then on through campaign execution. So how the review and approval process really affects them, it's with an optimized and streamlined review and approval process. Brand management teams, they can deliver marketing campaigns that are on brand and on message, and they can even better manage those proofs through multiple versions. So this really creates, again, those better audit trails with a greater degree of more visibility and transparency so everybody on the team can truly know what's the status of a specific creative project. So think of some of those different types of roles in the brand management function. This could be, a digital marketing manager, a brand manager. We mentioned PR, even communication. So all of those people are part of this brand management team, and they truly need that visibility into the entire creative review and approval process, right? Because they need to be able to see what hangups may come, and they need to be able to manage and get that project to market as quickly as they can. Having more of that visibility, you can really now watch all of that content, have more of a consistent message, make sure that you're driving the same message across all of that content that your brand team is creating. So that's the brand management side. So now let's talk a little bit about marketing operations as a team function. So the marketing operations function, it really assists that C-suite in the development of the organization's policies, the goals of the organization. They really manage and optimize the marketing technology that your team is using, and they are the ones that really decide on the in-house or even outsourced resources that help to streamline those processes that will positively impact the company's bottom line, right? So let's talk about now how the operations team, how the review and approval process might affect them. So this function, it's really responsible for managing the marketing technology of the organization. And as often, they're the first people that IT calls when multiple email messages with large file types and large file attachments, they start clogging up that corporate email servers during that creative review and approval process. Or in general, operations, it's that function to find those solutions to the inefficiencies that may be plaguing your team, including the review and approval process. So their job really is to find the marketing technology tools for your toolkit that make your team more productive and more creative at the end of the day, especially for those marketing teams. So think of some of these different types of role responsibilities for this function might be your operations manager, or we're commonly now seeing specific titles around creative application managers, creative application specialists. They're focused on finding, again, those marketing toolkit tools for you to use to be more effective at your job. All right, so let's talk about all of you creative professionals out there. How about creative review and approval? So for creative professionals, work in an organization's marketing department or even your ad or marketing agency. Think of your graphic designers, your creative directors, your web designers. They're really responsible for the production of all of that creative design, different advertising projects, and they have to balance the time and cost restraints that come with all these projects that are getting thrown their way. And oftentimes, they're getting all of these requests, and they're an endless pile of review comments, both physical and digital. So whether they're getting feedback at the water cooler or they're passing someone in the hallway, people are constantly giving them feedback, no matter where they are, on specific creative that they are creating. So really when we think about how the creative review and approval process affects them, it's with this organized review and approval process. They must work with a project manager, if there even is one, or they're often left to decipher, which comments and changes are used when there are multiple ones that are made for each type of creative asset. So a lot of times this person is building and creative that piece of creative asset, and they don't have that single source of truth where they can see everyone's comments in one place. It may be sticky notes that they have to decipher, someone's chicken scratch handwriting for the feedback for a creative asset. So not having a formal review and approval process set in place, these creative professionals have a hard time really consolidating all that information and getting it into the next version without having to create 10 versions to get to the final product. Really about consolidating the amount of work that needs to be done, because time is money, and the more we can be more efficient for our creative professionals, they can be more creative, and they don't need to worry about all those manual tasks that are associated with creative review and approval. They can truly focus on what matters most, and they can be more productive and more creative. All right, and then we're going to move on to the next role within a marketing organization. So we're going to think about our project management folks. So the project management person, they're really charged with balancing all of the large volumes of work to meet either the boss or their client's expectations. So he or she is truly responsible for, organizing and managing the production of creative design and advertising projects. And really these demands, it's really demanding, less hand-holding and more accountability for other team members. So they're really the ones that are those traffic cops. Think of the traffic coordinators, project managers. They're kind of patrolling and making sure the project stays on time and on budget. And is making sure they're consolidating all that feedback for their graphic designers or for other team members that are outside of the marketing department. So let's talk a little bit now about, again, going back to how does the review and approval process specifically affect these guys? So the last thing these professionals really need is an organized and a mismanaged review and approval process that slows them down. So without that appropriate balance of authority, diligence, and agility to manage those varying levels of work, the day-to-day management of creative content really becomes cumbersome, sluggish, and even problematic sometimes, especially when you have a large volume of projects that are coming your way that have a lot of content, whether you're on the brand side or even on the agency side. All right, Michael, now I'm ready for you to flip to the last team that we'll talk about here is the account management function. So this function is really responsible for managing and maintaining mainly client relationships, both internal, if you're other clients or other teams within the organization, and external. If you're working, if you're at an agency and you're working with external client reviewers, it's really about communicating. And at the end of the day, one of the key things is managing expectations, right? So communicating, managing those expectations, that is the key factor for this function, as well as developing any type of accountability structure for all the stakeholders that are on a specific project. So how does the review and approval project affect them? Well, they're truly looking at an inefficient review and approval process. It's going to throw a serious wrench in the project timeline. So maintaining really the peace between clients and creative during that entire project life cycle is hard enough without being, burdened with monitoring or fielding any kind of complaints about something as seemingly as simply as just getting an approval on a piece of creative content. And really, it goes back to giving accountability back to those stakeholders. And we can easily kind of do that within the review and approval process. So think of these kind of roles or responsibilities. It's going to be your account managers, your account coordinators, even your account executives are typical roles that can be within this account management team. And then the next one we're going to talk about, and the last one, before I hand it back over to Michael, is let's talk about compliance. Now, I don't want everybody to cringe because I use the word compliance. So not long ago, marketers would have considered compliance to be the responsibility of the CEO, the CFO, and the legal department, right? And really given that this rapid rate of innovation in marketing techniques in the area, we're now getting more personalized content, user-generated content, and demographic targeting, there's this new level of scrutiny really being placed on marketing operations and specifically content marketing. And it ultimately comes down to marketing compliance. So compliance regulations, they're constantly changing. And to be honest, you shouldn't have to expect your sales or marketing team to keep up with all the specifics of the various laws and privacy acts that are being passed every day. So, however, with so much at stake, it's really important that you have a system in place that monitors some compliance standards and really recognizes the potential violations early enough on in that creative review and approval or the creative process so that they can be corrected. So you should have an audit trail regarding any type of key aspects of compliance where applicable. So for example, we're thinking customer-facing assets, or another example would maybe be the collection of customer information, customer data, email subscription process, so that you can really protect your company in the face of any complaints from customers. So compliance always has its hands in the cookie jar, right? And compliance is really prevalent. It's a prevalent business concern, partly because an ever-increasing number of regulations that really require companies to be vigilant about maintaining a full understanding of their regulatory compliance requirements. And some of those prominent regulations and standards with organizations, they need to be compliant. So some of those things you might think of are Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, Dodd-Frank Act, FTC, etc. So those are just some common regulations that are in place. And don't just think of compliance as for highly regulated industries. Compliance is not just about healthcare or financial services. Compliance is for all types of brands, right? There's certain brand standards. We don't want to get the wrong logo on the wrong piece of collateral, or maybe a sales rep gets their hands on the logo and it's fuzzy and pixelated and it's not matching the brand standards and the quality that we want our brand to be represented as. Because if compliance standards aren't upheld, customers may lose trust in us. That consistency and that messaging and our tone is not there. So compliance, again, just isn't rules and regulations. It's also those branding guidelines that you and your company set for the business. All right, so let's take a quick snapshot of a couple key takeaways, and then I'm going to turn it over to Michael to give us some tips on how to fix if we have a broken review and approval process. So the first takeaway is creative review and approval process. It must be optimized. It must be managed. And one of the first things that we talk and we stress about, especially with some of our clients, is let's talk about your current review and approval process. You probably have one, but it's not documented. So there may be some bottlenecks that happen within that process. Or, you may not have a process at all. So it's really about documenting it first and looking at it, optimizing it, managing it, making sure the right people are involved at the right time. And then, of course, far too often review and approval, it's just a box that you check on your project timeline. No, it's more than that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Michael, and talk to us a little bit about, some different things that some of our attendees can take away today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. So now that we've demonstrated that the review and approval process should be a business critical process, I want to show you how to fix your review and approval process, whether you have one in existence or maybe you don't have one at all. These steps will help you basically fix it. I'm going to show you how to evaluate your current process, like Kelsey was talking about. Then we're going to build the new one, a new workflow, and then we're going to change the hearts and minds of everybody in your department and possibly your organization and implement this new process. So, it's hard to fix something when you don't know what's broken, right? So in order to get the clarity on the time and cost that is wasted on your current process and learn where the productivity leaks and bottlenecks are occurring, let's document the current process. So some of the benefits for this exercise include, that you're clarifying the time and cost that is wasted on the current process. You're going to display where productivity leaks are occurring. You're going to create a baseline for comparison. Again, if you don't know what you're currently doing, you can't find the areas to fix. And hopefully this will help you think about all the pain points, the obstacles, and the frustrations and headaches caused by the current process. So let's take a good hard look at what you're currently doing. And I've got 5 questions that I'm going to walk you through that you should answer when taking a look at your current process. So number 1, how do you currently route content in your organization for review and approval? So I want you to think about the amount of content that must be reviewed in your company and think of all the ways you distribute it for review. It can be as simple as putting an asset in a folder and passing it from one person to the next, as in a job jacket, or using a variety of methods for routing assets, including printing out proofs, sending PDFs via email, or using an FTP server to send large files. And honestly, are you currently using any tools for tracking, review, and approval? Is it just a checkbox in your project management solution, or are you using some other types of systems to help you keep track of that? Write all of that down. The next question to ask is which groups, departments, and individuals participate in the process. So what we're doing here is we want to help you gain visibility into the number of people and departments who actively review creative content. This is a major step to gaining control of your process. What you might discover here is that you're going to see several people who have no need to review certain projects. And this just mires the entire process. So maybe there's somebody who just always seems to get approved to review. You do it like the old buckshot routine where you create a proof and you send it out to a whole bunch of people. Well, maybe not everybody needs to be part of the review and approval of either this stage of the process or this project in general. So what you want to do here is list all the people within your company who've ever reviewed projects. Also, if it's applicable, list any outside or offsite or freelancers, like proofreaders or copy editors, who might be touching any of your projects. Build a comprehensive list as possible of everybody who's ever touched a project for review and approval. All right, question 3 to ask in your evaluation. Are reviews sequential or parallel? Let me explain what I mean by these. So a sequential review process means that the draft of a creative asset cannot move forward in the process until a person or group has reviewed it first. For example, a proof must first be reviewed by the creative director before it can be reviewed by the vice president of marketing, before it can be reviewed by the EVP, etc. So it's A, B, C, D. Nothing happens until somebody signs off at a particular point. Now, a parallel review has 2 or more separate groups of people reviewing the proof at the same time. So, for example, in this case, the product group and proofreaders review the proof concurrently, right? So you've got product checking out to make sure the facts are correct, and you've also got your proofreaders or copy editors checking the grammar of the same proof, and then you collect all those comments, create the next draft, and move it forward in the process. So that's a parallel review. Or some of them might just be your workflows have a combination of both. So the bottom line is whether it's one or the other or both, understanding the path a creative asset takes during review and approval helps you identify the bottlenecks and potential roadblocks. Question number 4, how many review cycles are typical in your process? Now, you might not be able to answer this question if you're not currently tracking your proofs and you have a process. But one way to think about this is by the number of versions that you create for a particular project. Now, this may not be a true measure of the number of review cycles because you might encounter this that a single version of a project will get reviewed multiple times before it is updated to the next version. So In the next section, I'm going to explain why review cycles versus versions are important here. So you want to write down the number of review cycles, or if you don't have those, write down the number of versions. But again, it's important that you think about these things. Question number 5, what kinds of creative content are you reviewing and approving? So is it marketing collateral, web pages, videos, podcasts, packaging, newsletters, advertising, press materials, anything like that? List all the types of creative content that you make and then review. Most organizations produce a variety of this content, but it's essential to consider these types of collateral and media because this ensures that the appropriate workflow is in place, as well as assigning the appropriate reviewers to a project. So again, you're listing all the people that are going to be reviewing it, the number of review cycles, the groups, the departments, and the types of creative content that you're creating. List all of those out for evaluation. Then we're going to take this information and move on to step 2, and we're going to build a new workflow. Now, this isn't a one-size-fits-all workflow. It just doesn't happen that way. And this is why it's important that you document all this stuff from those 5 questions. Because when you're designing these workflows, they're typically going to be more adaptable. They're going to be flexible, but they will have defined stages that allows you to route reviews and approvals based on the type of content and the type of people involved instead of taking a static approach. This allows team members and reviewers in each stage to have an immediate understanding of their respective roles in the review and approval process. All right, so let's take a look at how to create a new and improved workflow for your next creative project. So step 1, we're going to identify the project asset type. Knowing all the asset types you're dealing with will help you create your workflow, right? So perhaps a new product tutorial video needs multiple rounds of and levels of review, while an update to a product feature spec sheet needs only 1 or 2 sets of eyes, right? So that's why you want to list the particular project or asset type. Start there. Your next step is you want to identify all the reviewers and approvers. So there may be different teams or individuals who need to review a piece of content in a specific order. You may not want one team to see the content until another team has approved it, or you may not want people on one team to see comments from another team. Again, so this is why you want to list everybody out. Understand their roles and their stage in the review process. Step 3, define the review stages. So, previously I asked you about the number of review cycles your creative content typically undergoes. Maybe you're dealing with versions, but what defining review stages over versions allows you to do is gain greater control over the process. So it's just like setting a hard deadline with any of your other projects as you work through stages. Write the content, step 1. Step 2, deliver the writings to the graphic designers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the same kind of thing. When does legal need to review the project? Or when does marketing compliance need to look at something? Shooting everything out at once is not really a manageable process. Or saying we'll review a project until it's done is not a quantifiable number of review stages. So this is a process. It's a business critical process, and you want to manage and possibly templatize this process to improve the efficiency. All right, step 4, define who has final approval for each review stage and job. So without this accountability, a review stage could be held up by indecision or bogged down by endless rounds of discussion. So you want to make sure that your workflow offers sufficient flexibility to allow you to support different roles in the process, such as a reviewer only, reviewer and approver, but you also need to assign a primary decision maker or final decision maker for a particular stage or the job. Once you've defined the type of feedback required for each stage, someone must be made accountable for the final approval of those stages. Make sure that your workflow offers, So once again, this is about accountability and deadlines. You want to make sure that all of your reviewers know their role when it comes to a particular project, when it comes to a particular piece of content. Somebody might think that they have final approval on a particular review stage, but in your mind, they don't. You're just collecting some of their content and their comments. And that's why you want to write these down and define and assign who has this final approval. And finally, we're going to take the information from these first 4 steps, and you're going to design a workflow. So we recommend, well, there's a couple ways you can do this. If you're a visual person, you might try creating a flow chart. If you don't wish to draw one by hand, Microsoft PowerPoint has a built-in flow chart, or there's a cool website called lucidchart.com. That's LUCIDCHART.com, and you can create a free account and you can create all sorts of flow charts. Or you can list out each stage and the steps involved with each stage, which might be the best first step for you to take. So the goal here is to get project approval, right? Every project you want to get final review and approval, but you want to get it as efficiently as possible. And that was the point of these 5 steps. Identify the project asset type, identify the reviewers and approvals, define the review stages, define who has final approval for each review stage and job, and then write out the workflow or draw out the workflow. So step 3 in this process, right, is implementing the new workflow, because you've designed it, you've got it ready to go, but honestly, I think this might be the hardest part, changing the hearts and minds of your teammates, right, or your clients, or your bosses, or whoever. So, Kelsey, this is a little bit more of your expertise. Of the two of us, you're way more organized when it comes to change management than I am, so I'm going to let you take it over from here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So yeah, we've talked through, how to look at your current process, and then step 2 is kind of building it. Now it's all about implementing it, change management. So the first thing is, for change to truly happen, it helps if everyone involved really wants to make the change. Do they understand the need for the change? So not everyone can see that need. So you have to develop this sense of urgency around the need for change. What is the importance? Why is this going to make my life better at the end of the day? This may help you spark kind of that initial motivation to get things moving, create that urgency. So detail the problems with the current process. Really highlight how that negatively impacts the team. So think of time. They could have more time to do more work. They could, the resources that they're strapped currently with. And the money, right? Time is money, and the money that's caused in all the rework that happens if versions aren't managed properly, or feedback is coming in, 10 days later after version 1. So really highlight the negative impact, not just for the team, but sometimes you even have to go down to the individual level. What impact? Make that emotional impact. So having an open and honest conversation and convincing dialogue about what's happening with your current process that makes it inefficient. And if many people, if they start talking about the change you propose, the urgency can truly build and then feed off of itself, right? If you start to create and you get other team members on board, it'll be a little bit like a domino effect to truly roll out that entire urgency to the team, to really drive the change within the organization. So what else? So the next one is build a coalition. So convincing people that change is necessary, it often takes strong leadership and visible support from key people within your organization. So managing change isn't enough. You truly have to lead it. And you can find effective change leaders throughout your organization. And they don't necessarily have to follow the traditional company hierarchy. So to lead change, you need to bring together a coalition or a team of influential people whose power really comes from a variety of sources. It could be job title, it could be status, expertise, political importance, or even kind of that emotional person on the floor that really likes to drive change. So once you've figured out and formed your change coalition, it needs to work as a team. continuing to build the urgency and take on that momentum around the need for change. Because once you start rolling with the momentum, it's going to pick up with the rest of the team, and you have to keep that going. So what can you do as you're thinking through today? So one of them is to think about your organization today. Think about the members of your team. Identify who on that team are true leaders, as well as, those key stakeholders, how they can add value to my personal learning plan. Ask for an emotional commitment from these key people, and then truly work on that team building within your change coalition. And not to mention, make sure you check your team for weak areas and ensure that you have a good mix of people, different personalities, different departments, and different levels within the company, because that's really going to show that, this isn't a quick group. This is truly a team of people that are rolling with the same motivation to change the new process within the organization, to make the organization better, and to make each individual person on that team better at their job. Then the next one we have is communicate the process to the organization. So I love this comment here. What if, and I know that sounds kooky, we communicated with the employees? So really deriving the vision, it's not just enough for you to implement the change. You really need to communicate this vision across the entire company. So this communication, it should take place frequently and at important forums. So get the influential people in the company to endorse your efforts. People outside of your specific marketing department that are recognizing the change that you're implementing. Use every chance to really communicate your vision and be repetitive about it. Keep it constant communication. And this can even be, a board meeting or just simply talking over a lunch conversation. And then this is probably my favorite one, is just celebrate the short-term wins. And this is just talking about the quick wins are really the best way to keep the momentum and the positive energy flowing within the organization. And by quick wins, your team will get more of a greater satisfaction, and the company will really immediately see those advantages and your change initiatives. So every now and then, I recommend just producing a quick win for different stakeholders who get affected by the change process, and have highlight stories within the organization. When something goes really well, highlight that within your monthly meeting or within a quarterly business review. But always remember to keep an eye on those long-term goals as well to make sure you're staying in check with this specific change management. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap up and kind of summarize what we've talked about today. So the creative review and approval process, it really should never consist of sending proof to every conceivable stakeholder in a project at once. And there simply isn't a one-size-fits-all workflow like Michael was talking about earlier. Instead, by taking the time in advance to determine the routing of those review and approvals, really based on the type of content and the type of people that are involved in documenting the steps in advance, you're going to save time and money. So think about it. Evaluate your current process. Truly build out and understand what's the best and efficient way to build your new review and approval workflow. And then take some of the tips we talked about today around implementing your new creative review and approval process within your organization. Create that urgency. Build a core team of people to drive the initiative forward. And communicate, and be sure to reiterate the importance of why you are pushing for a new creative review and approval process. So the last one, I'm going to throw it back over to Michael, and he's just going to talk to us a little bit about, what are some things that you can use, some tools that you can put in your marketing technology toolkit that could really help you have a win with your creative review and approval process. Michael?
All right, thank you, Kelsey. So we've now showed you how to build a new one or improve on your existing review and approval process. And I think that when you go out and take these out into the real world, you're going to find that things are going to be a little bit better for you. But if you want to go from good to great, it might be time to think about an online proofing application. Because when you automate the review and approval process, you can reduce the effort spent managing proofs by 59% and increase the speed to market by 56%. And let me show you how we do that. So if you can remember from the beginning of the presentation, we had a similar illustration of an unoptimized creative review and approval process. And so as you can see from this example, it's much more organized and optimized. And so online proofing with ProofHQ puts a completely different workflow around managing the process. It changes and it grows with your business, which is what it's supposed to do, and it's a way better than sending email attachments, sorting through individual comments, sharing with other team members, print, PDF, fax, and then trying to have somebody track all of that, whether in a job jacket or in a spreadsheet. So we did some research not too long ago. We hired a firm called IntelliLink. That's an independent consulting firm that specializes in marketing process re-engineering, and because we wanted to verify and quantify these metrics, right? We wanted to see if we could put some numbers behind what happens when you automate your review and approval process. And so a few things that we discovered are you get a more productive workflow. Again, just by what you saw when you do it manually and you get control over your workflow, it's going to be more productive. Using online proofing, we have found that clients have improved their project delivery by 56%, so it's faster. Managing multiple versions, segmentation, and localization across different output channels can be a proofing and approval nightmare. So, again, think of your current process. All sorts of inputs, all sorts of outputs, everything coming in and going out at different times. So by standardizing and streamlining the workflow, it makes it possible to manage this complex approval process with efficiency, accuracy, and speed. And so with online proofing, a review team spend less time manually printing, posting and routing proofs, and consolidating feedback from email and PDF attachments. Another area we looked at was what happens when you're able to consolidate the feedback electronically versus everything being written down. And what we discovered is that there are 29% fewer revisions on a proof and 59% reduction in effort spent managing this review process. So there was practically no more searching through email chains for the most recent layouts or comments. And there's no more endless rounds of meetings and conference calls, right? So you're able to put those stop points, again, like we outlined earlier, where you define the review stages. And finally, multiple versions and constant change requests impact proofing accuracy and efficiency. And using an online proofing solution like ProofHQ, it keeps those comments and feedback and response dialogue organized and available directly on the proofs themselves. But it's also, in our application, for example, you can have threaded comments. So as opposed to like what you would get on a social media platform like Facebook, you would have threaded comments on one particular suggested edit, versus you go into like a Microsoft Word document, and if you've seen the bazillion colors that can happen when multiple people access that document, it gets really confusing who said what and where. That problem can be eliminated if you move your review and approval process from hard copy and paper routing into the cloud. So that's a bit of our value prop, but very briefly, who are we? We are the company that defines and leads the global market for online proofing. And we do this by delivering an unparalleled experience for our employees and customers. ProofHQ was founded in 2007, and we had a simple realization that for most marketing teams, the process of managing review and approval of creative content was broken. And I hope that today we kind of showed that to you through this webinar and the evaluation steps that you can take to see just where all those bottlenecks and inefficient steps take place. So today we serve more than 3,000 brands and agencies around the world, and this is just a small sampling of the various industries and companies that we serve. So we work with a range of customers in size and in industry, from retail to consumer packaged goods to healthcare to financial services to automotive. We serve a pretty diverse group of organizations because it shows that a diverse group of organizations need to quantify and optimize their review and approval process. And for these guys, they decided to move that process into online proofing. And with that, we are finished. If there is some time, if we've got some questions, we'll be glad to answer them. And feel free to contact us later at the following information listed on this slide.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelsey and Michael. We really appreciate you guys walking us through those steps and for all of your insight. So as Michael mentioned, it's now time for Q&A. And if you haven't submitted your questions yet, feel free to do so. Also, make sure to tweet at hashtag DMN Webcast and hashtag FixProcess. So I'll kick things off with the questions. Does the review and approval workflow need to be part of a project management or workflow management solution?
Yeah, so Michael, I'll go ahead and take this one. So really what we've seen is it can happen both ways. From a proofing perspective, you can have a standalone proofing solution, and some of our smaller customers use it a little bit as their project management tool. But where we've seen the most success is whenever this is evolved throughout the entire marketing work management landscape. So you start with having a project management application, and the creative review and approval is part of that project, right? So you create start a project, and that asset is created. That asset has to go through review and approval at least once in its lifetime. And so once you create that project, review and approval is part of the entire project lifecycle. So you can add that in as another step within. And then there's that workflow of review and approval that sits right within online proofing. And then once it's been reviewed and approved, that final asset, it's going to go, wherever you store your final data. So typically in a digital asset management system. So again, it starts with that asset creation. It goes through review and approval. Once it's through review and approval, it can sit right within a digital asset management system. And that's what we've seen work really well. We have several integrations set up with other organizations. Specifically, now that we are a part of the Workfront company, we have the full end-to-end solution from Workfront having the project management system. Now ProofHQ sits beautifully right inside their application. And then they have a WebDAM integration as well, that it sits right within the WebDAM once it's finally approved. We also have integrations with other project management applications. I see another question came in around how is it different in Basecamp. So Basecamp is really we have an integration with them where the project is created within Basecamp, and review and approval and editing an asset is part of the process. So Basecamp is really the front side of where you create the project, and then online proofing is part of the project holistically. So those integrations can be Basecamp on the front end, and then we also have integrations with Widen, Zynet, as well from a digital asset management system.
And then one attendee asked, what's the difference between review cycles and versions?
So I'll take that one. That is a great question, and I wrote that one down because that's something that I want to, just for myself, improve how to differentiate the two. And honestly, that boils down to how your group, your organization defines these things. So sometimes, so a review cycle can cover, in my mind, multiple versions of a document. So, for example, let's think again to that parallel review cycle where you've got copy editors, proofreaders, maybe somebody outside your company reviewing version 1, and then you have another group of people within your company reviewing version 1. And once that feedback comes back, you combine those two into version 2. Then you're ready to review that document, review version 2, and once it's approved, that ends revision cycle number 1. And then you move on to the next step, if there is a next step. So because sometimes a review cycle needs that final approval from somebody, and they want to see the clean version of a document. They want to see all of the changes made during that cycle. They don't want to necessarily see the progress of the changes. They just want to see the final version of the project for that particular cycle. And then when that person approves or makes changes or whatever, then that can kick to the next review cycle. And that could be moving to, so maybe review cycle number 1 involves the creative department, number 2 involves the compliance/legal department, and number 3 is the, maybe it's the product people who get the final sign-off on the particular project. So that's the difference between revision cycles and versions. In my mind, there are multiple versions of a particular project document asset within each revision cycle.
And do you guys have any advice for streamlining internal creative review, such as review by writers, editors, designers?
Well, again, that goes to what we just talked about here, where when you list everybody out and compare what you're currently doing with where you want to go, that's going to help you develop your own internal best practices. So maybe you're using your brand and you use an agency for your creative. So you need to figure out how to, work internally first or second, depending on how you want to work with the agency to review particular projects. Or if you're working inside, again, who touches what and when for each particular asset. Again, it's all about listing everybody who is involved in some form of review. Anybody who's ever touched a document for review, who's touched an asset for review, then reviewing all of that information and determining who needs to touch it and when, and then developing the workflow. So that's my advice for building that flow, is analyze everything that you're doing right now and then try to figure out how to streamline it going forward, and then test it. If you find that projects get completed a little bit faster based on this, review workflow number 1 that you implement, tweak it. If it slows things down, you definitely need to tweak it. So I hope that answered the question.
And this next one, just kind of piggybacking off of the last question, is a two-parter. Should you include proofreaders as part of the review process, or is that something better suited for project management? And then someone in the audience wanted to know if you plan to update Proof HQ with common proofreader marks so that they can easily use them as stamps for easy review.
Well, I can't speak to the features, but for proofreaders, a lot of times the proofreaders, that starts very early in the creative process, and hopefully you've taken care of all your grammatical errors at that point, and that's often in just a text document, right? Or sometimes you're editing, of the first version of something as it's laid out. But yes, in my mind, proofreading is definitely part of the process. But upon reflection, again, it's how you want to work. So maybe your creative process involves proofreaders are very early. It's during the writing of the writing of the brief and some of the other stuff. That's where the proofreaders are involved. They're involved with the copywriting of the original concept before it gets flipped over to design. So determine where you want to start your review and approval process on the project timeline, and that'll help you decide where you want to put proofreaders into your cycle. For me personally, I like including them in an earlier version of a project, especially if it's like an ebook, because maybe I've read it, I've written it, I've edited the document, I've had a second set of eyes look on it, but then once we've dropped it into the template of the design, sometimes you miss it, and then you want to have a new set of eyes or a refreshed set of eyes to review the content as it's laid out, and that's where putting a proofreader into the review and approval cycle can be important.
Yeah, Kelsey, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, so as far as kind of the feature side from a product when you're looking for an online proofing solution, so specifically talking about different different types of markup tools. So some of those that can be used from a proofreading standpoint is I completely agree with Michael. Include them if they have multiple, if you have one, include them early on in your review cycle so they can catch those editing mistakes or errors before. But then make sure when you're searching for a solution, it provides that flexibility of having different types of text annotation tools. So whether it's just editing a single word or editing to replace, or being able to highlight the text you want and fix those. We have a lot of publication and book companies that use ProofHQ for that specific reason. They're using our text annotation tools to be able to highlight the text that they're referring to, and then they can easily type in exactly what it needs to be replaced with or delete it altogether. So look for the specific tools that you may be searching for from a text annotation perspective, and then also different types of ways that you can tag things from a proofreading perspective. So if there's specific tags that you can add for a specific proofreader or a specific way that you review your content, look for those detailed features within an online proofing solution.
And how did you guys measure the productivity of those clients who automated their review process?
Yeah, so I can jump in on this one as well, Michael, and you can add anything. But really, when we're looking at productivity from a high-level analytical perspective, so our application uses a couple different analytics and different reports. So you can customize reports based on the information you want to see. But one of the biggest ones that we look at is how much time did it take compared to other projects that we're working on. So if you separate your review and approval process based on different types of content or different projects, look at how those vary over time. Did it take you 30 days or did it take you 2 weeks to complete something? The first is look how many times. The second productivity metric I would look at is how many versions did it take to get something done? How many times did I have to cycle this through the organization to come up with a completed project? And specifically if you're working from an automated process, that really makes sure that it doesn't get hung up on someone's desk or stuck in someone's inbox. When something is approved or approved with changes, we call it within the application, it's going to automatically trigger right to the next group of reviewers that it needs to go to. You're not going to have that delay. So really look at the productivity from a time perspective, as well as how much work is being, how many revisions it's taking to get completed.
And I'll jump in here on that one too. You talk about time to finish a project, Kelsey. So if you, let's just say, your typical 40-hour work week and you're able to, you get done 10 projects in a 40-hour work week, right? So if by implementing the review and approval process, you're getting projects done faster, and then in that same amount of time, 40 hours, you realize you're now doing 11, 12, or 13 projects in the same time period it used to take 10, that's another measure of productivity. It's not hard numbers, but it's still a way to quantify the productivity and how successful this new online proofing is working for you.
Yeah, that's a good one, Michael.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for asking our questions. And unfortunately, we're all out of time. So again, thank you, Kelsey and Michael, for the terrific insight. And thank you all for attending. Remember, this presentation will be made available. So feel free to watch it again or to review the materials and share them with your colleagues. And this concludes our webcast, 3 Ways to Fix Your Review and Approval Process, brought to you by Workfront company ProofHQ. Thanks so much for attending, and have a great day.